as you all know, I'm really fascinated with a lot of the crazy things that are in this world and the experiences that people have. And so I wanted to go through and do this because I think it's just fun to research it more deeply and talk about it. So since this is the first one, I'm going to explain how I'm going to be doing this. So first I'm going to read the definition of whatever we're talking about out of the Cryptopedia. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the real life examples and some of the more intricate details, and if I can, I will be linking below and talking about some extra materials that you can read or watch that will help you understand this subject a little bit more deeply. Today we'll be talking about crisis apparitions. According to the Cryptopedia, a crisis apparition is a spiritual image or being that appears to a person shortly before death, or a similar image that appears to warn of impending sickness, disaster, or death. I have on a shark onesie for today, so we're just gonna pop this up and bring a little humor into this so you don't get too scared, because then you can look at me and laugh. I do want to make clear before we start that I am in no way an expert on any of this. I'm doing my own research from my own experience, from things I've seen or heard or listened to. So please, if you're an expert, don't be upset with me. Take it to the comments and inform people. Please be nice. Apparition doesn't necessarily mean a physical form or ghost or anything like that. So to me, to give you an example, you know how like a square is a rhombus, but a rhombus isn't always a square? It's kind of like that. Like, apparition can be used interchangeably as ghost, but it doesn't mean that an apparition is always a ghost. I thought that was interesting because when I looked up crisis apparitions, it's not necessarily a ghost that you're seeing. It could just be something that is appearing to you that isn't there physically, if that makes sense. Now, the research on crisis apparitions is a little confusing because it seems like it works a number of ways from what I've researched. So in some cases, crisis apparitions seem to be people who are in immediate danger, who project somehow mentally, telepathically maybe, or just like emotionally project what's happening to them to a loved one, and then that loved one shortly finds out after that they were in danger or that they had died. The other kind of definition of crisis apparitions, which are apparitions that appear to people who are dying or people who are in trouble, to kind of encourage them and comfort them in a time of trauma or as they are dying. So I want to give you an example of the first type of crisis apparition that I talked about. I put on my glasses so I can read directly off of the screen. I don't like it because there's a glare, so I take them off usually when I'm talking. But this is the first type of crisis apparition, which is the apparition that is a person who's projecting a trauma or the fact that they're dying to a loved one so that they know that something bad is happening to them. So this is the story of Miss Paquette. Her brother was working on a tugboat in Chicago. She woke up one morning in an unshakable depressive mood. She went to the pantry for some tea and turned around to see her brother, Edmund, who was standing a few feet away from her. The apparition that she saw had his back to her, and they were in the act of falling forward away from her. And they seemed to be impaled on two loops or a loop of rope drawing against his legs. It only lasted a minute, but once Miss Paquette realized that it was her brother, she basically dropped her tea and realized that her brother had drowned. And after that, she received the news that he had fallen overboard and drowned, exactly how she had seen it, but it was 6 hours before her vision. It's a kind of a way for your loved ones to telepathically tell you what happened to them. Which is a super interesting concept, and there are a ton of examples of this that you can find. They're definitely interesting to read for sure. I read another one that was about two little kids who were friends, and one of them was going in for a surgery. They played together outside every day, and the kid who wasn't going in for the surgery turned around in their room and saw their friend standing there who asked to play outside, and the little kid went to the mom to ask permission. The mom turned white as a sheet and said, "That's impossible. Unfortunately, your friend died several hours ago of an allergic reaction during surgery." I'm going to take these off now because now I want to talk about the other type of crisis apparition, which is the apparition of past loved ones, usually, that appears to someone who is in trauma or who is dying. Now, this is said to be a mental projection of someone you love and just a memory of them that is able to help you kind of feel comforted during a time of trauma or during a time of you passing away. It's also said to be a type of motivator for those people who are experiencing that kind of trauma. There are a ton of examples of this, and this one is extremely interesting to me. They're also known for those who are dying as deathbed visions, and I actually experienced this with someone who died, who I unfortunately had to watch pass away, who talked a lot about seeing his mom and his dad. That was just a really interesting experience to me, because I've read and I've heard of so many other stories of people saying that they have seen parents or sisters, brothers who have passed before them, and they see these visions. They can see them for months before they pass away or just immediately before. I think a good pop culture reference, I'm hoping that no one comes at me for this because I do love Harry Potter, but I'm not a Potterhead, if that makes sense. So in the movies, there are times where Harry is weakened. There are times where Harry seems kind of weak and he sees his parents and the people who have passed come up and help him and give him strength and help him to defeat whatever battle he is in. And I think that's a good example of a crisis apparition, although in the Harry Potter universe, ghosts are normal and they like run around and do all of these things. I would say that in some situations it's probably a crisis apparition that Harry projects to help him, to give him strength, and to help him get through the fights that he has to go through. Back to the deathbed visions type of crisis apparition. These are very interesting to me, and sometimes people say that they can see these in dreams before they pass away, and I think it's a really interesting concept. And I actually watched a TED Talk called I See Dead People, Dreams and Visions of the Dying, and that is by Dr. Christopher Kerr. And it was just super interesting to me because he spent a lot of his time doing research with dying patients who were, I guess, in hospice, and he recorded their interviews with him where they would talk about who they saw and the experiences that they had. In almost every case, they were having visions and dreams of people who had passed before them, like their parents or a spouse or something like that. And this was always a very comforting thing. It never scared them. It made them feel warm and happy and excited to see that person in their visions. In some cases, they were projections of people who were still alive, but in most cases, they were projections of people who had already passed. As I said, most of them are warm and welcoming, but Dr. Kerr actually talks about one person in particular who was a veteran, and I think he said that he was involved in the Normandy beach storming, and you know, he was one of the persons who had to help clear the dead off of that beach after all of that happened, where so many soldiers died. And he said that in his dream, in his vision, he actually interacted with a dead soldier who he had helped clear, who said, like, they're gonna come for you next, which was kind of creepy and scary to him. But in most cases, they were always comforting, which is a comforting thing to think about. So the way that they appear, so it seems like the first type that I talked about, they usually appear the way that they die. With Mrs. Paquette, her brother appeared with, you know, the loops, and he was falling forward and he was kind of projecting and showing her what had happened. But in the other situation, where it's usually like a vision or projection of a loved one that's comforting and warm, people say that when they see them, they're kind of glowing and they're full body figures. They know exactly who they are. In some cases, they're younger, or they look however they looked when they felt their best. And in other cases, it's just how that person remembers them. But I guess that's pretty much it when it comes to crisis apparitions. If you've had an experience with a crisis apparition, I would love to know what that's like. I know that there are plenty of people alive who have had experiences on one or both occasions that I talked about, where either they saw someone they loved who was harmed, or they themselves were in a state of trauma or close to dying and they experienced something. So I would be super interested to hear your stories. And that is it for today's Spooky Sunday. Thank you guys for joining me, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!